Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission meeting for Monday, March 25th, 2024. My name is Shauna Bonston, and I am the chairperson for the Glendale Transportation and Parking Commission. I'd like to read the following statement. For public comments and questions during this meeting, please call 818-937-8100, and city staff will be submitting these questions and comments in real time to the appropriate person during this meeting. With that, I'm calling this meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. May we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Bonston,
Here.
Commissioner Lester,
Here.
Commissioner Amirian,
Here.
Commissioner Ordubegian,
Here.
Commissioner Avagian,
Here.
Student Commissioner Eubank.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda.
Item 1B, flag salute.
Next item on the agenda, please.
Item 2, posting of the agenda. The agenda for the March 25th, 2024 meeting of the Glendale Special Transportation and Parking Commission was posted by Thursday, March 21, 2024, before 5 p.m. on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
Excellent. And the next item, please.
Item 3, approval of minutes. Approval of minutes for the regular Transportation and Parking Commission meeting of February 26, 2024.
Thank you. If there are no comments or questions, do I have a motion approving the minutes of February 26, 2024?
I'll move.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you.
Chairperson Bonston,
Yes?
Commissioner Lester,
Yes.
Commissioner Ordubegian,
Yes.
Commissioner Avagian,
Yes.
Commissioner Amirian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. And the next item on the agenda.
Item 4, presentations. However, there are no presentations for this meeting.
I see. The next item on the agenda, please.
Item 5, consent items. We do not have any consent items at this time.
And the next item.
Item 6, action items, and no action items at this time.
Okay, and for the next item that is neither consent, action, or a presentation, what might it be?
Item 7, informational report, presentation of citywide bicycle transportation plan development update and request for comments from the Transportation and Parking Commission regarding the proposed bike lane network and implementation phasing.
Thank you. Do we have a presentation?
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We appreciate to be here today and update you with the latest update on our bicycle transportation plan and seeking your valuable comments and recommendation. In our last presentation to the TPC on November 21st, 2023, we presented the draft of bike lane network. Subsequently, we carefully incorporated the received feedback to refine our plan, resulting in the current recommended bike lane network complemented by a comprehensive 20-year phasing strategy. Following this, we engaged in a joint session with Sustainability Commission and Planning Commission on March 6 to gather additional insights. We now eagerly anticipate your final round of valuable feedback and inputs, which will enable us to consolidate all feedback and present a robust plan to the City Council for their final review and direction. To provide further detail on BTP update and progress, I will hand it over to our consultant project manager, Mr. Sam Former from Borough Hopple. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And just for the record, might you enter your name?
My name is Arezu Kamali. I'm the associate planner with and project manager for the bicycle transportation plan.
Thank you so much.
All right. Should I go ahead?
Hello.
Oh, I hear an echo.
Looks like we can see you and hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen okay?
I can see your screen, but it looks like a stage view is being customized, whatever that means.
I don't know what that means.
Okay.
But you can hear me and you can see the
Yes, there's
presentation?
just a pop-up window. Does anyone have control of that and able to stop it? It's asking us for options. That looks better. And then one more click at the X. Ah,
Yes.
oh no, we're back to your lovely face, but not yet a presentation. We're working on it. Perfect.
Yeah, okay. Looks good? Okay, I'm assuming this looks good. Okay,
Yes.
sorry about that. All right, wonderful. Good evening. My name is Sam Fromer. I am the project manager for the bicycle transportation plan for the consultant team. I am an associate at Bureau Happold. I've been working here in the city for over a year on this transportation, on the bike plan. And I like to show this slide every time I make a presentation because I think it's really important. I don't think that this is just perfunctory. We really are creating a collaborative plan for a 20-year vision for biking in the city of Glendale. And I've learned a lot about the city of Glendale over the past year. And one thing that we have heard over and over again from the commissions, from the community members we talk to, community representatives, from our wonderful project development team, who's been our advisory committee for well over a year at this point as well. And from city council is that people want to be able to bike. People don't currently feel safe biking in the city of Glendale. They don't feel safe walking often in the city of Glendale, and many people don't feel safe by even driving in the city of Glendale. You know, I will share some crash statistics later on that you all have already seen, but I just want to relay that anecdotally we have heard over and over and over again that people do not feel safe on the streets of Glendale. And so while this is a bicycle plan, this is also a street safety plan. This is a way of remaking the streets of Glendale to make it safer and easier and more inviting to walk, to bike, and to drive, to use the streets of Glendale. So while this, again, is focused on biking, this will have wonderful and pervasive safety benefits for people using the streets, for walking on the sidewalks, and for driving through and on city streets. So as Arzu said, in the past, we've presented existing conditions, crash analyses, an early draft of the bike network. You know, since then, we have heard that people, you know, from city council and from you all, that people want a more robust network. So we have gone, and I will get into more detail in this in a minute, we've gone through an extensive drafting process to create a robust bike network for the entire city. So I'll be talking about that, how we got there. So that will be our network recommendations and phasing. And then I'll talk about other non-network recommendations, policy recommendations and the like, and then next steps. So I just want to reiterate, because I know that you all have seen this before and maybe you are tired of seeing this, but that this is based on an update of the 2012 bike plan, which relied heavily on sharrows, or class 3 facilities, which are basically just signs and painted arrows on the road. So no real protection for cyclists. And as a result, you don't have a connected bike network and people don't really bike a lot in the city of Glendale. But Glendale is a wonderful place to bike. potentially. It has great weather, it's dense, there's an intact street grid, you have a wonderful mix of uses, you have these distributed neighborhood centers all over the city, distances are short. Not necessarily all for all trips, but to get to your local store or your school or the library or the park. I think a lot of destinations are within a couple of miles. There's also some big challenges. I'm not going to deny that. You do have freeways crisscrossing the city. The city is very hilly, right? But that doesn't mean that it's not potentially a wonderful place to bike. As I was talking about before, when with safety, but there are major concerns about safety. People don't feel safe and generally aren't safe biking on the streets of Glendale. And our crash analysis bears that out. This is just crashes involving a cyclist, but it highlights the streets that you would, think are probably the least safe for people to bike on, but also to drive on and to walk on. These are your major downtown corridors that are wide. They carry lots of traffic. They're high-speed traffic often, especially when there isn't a lot of congestion, which is most of the day, or late at night. And I just want to emphasize again that these are the people that live and work and, play in the city of Glendale. And in the past 10 years, 20 people have been killed or severely injured in the city of Glendale just biking alone. And so, again, this plan is an opportunity to make it possible to bike safely through the city, and in turn will make it safer to walk and to drive. And I just want to emphasize that, we've also heard a lot over the past year, no one bikes in Glendale, or the only people that bike in Glendale are wearing spandex or have an expensive bike. Or, why would you build bike lanes when no one bikes? And the answer is because there's a huge latent demand or potential for people biking. And in general, studies have shown over and over and over again that while a small amount of people are strong and fearless, that's the kind of people that bike today, there's really a large majority of people, 50, 60, sometimes 70% of people that want to bike but don't feel safe, or it is inconvenient, or it doesn't fit their lives. And as you build a bike network that is safe and functional and connected, you get different kinds of cyclists. You get people biking with their kids to go to school. You get older people. You get kids riding around the neighborhood or to go to the park, right? And it's not just commuter trips, right? People can, again, take local trips, run errands, see friends. If they live and work within a couple miles, maybe they will also commute. But this is not just for people trying to get to work. This is for everyone. And again, as you build out a safe and usable network, you will see a wider variety of cyclists. And so today, you see the extremely strong and fearless and enthused, right? And then the other type of cyclists you often see in Glendale that I have seen are people that often don't have another choice, or this is their best option, right? Those are low-income people, people with low-wage jobs where this is the fastest often and cheapest way for them to get to work. And so that doesn't show up in these studies, but you see it all over LA County, you see it in Glendale, and you see it all over the country, right? Especially as there are more and more delivery cyclists and people, trying to just get to work in the fastest and most economical way possible. So again, the existing network in the previous bike plan really relied on sharrows or class 3, and so there is a disconnected network that really doesn't serve almost any trips or even long distance, even if you're a recreational cyclist and you want to go around Glendale. And so again, the network doesn't feel safe. isn't safe and is not enjoyable to use. I think calling it there really isn't a bike network. We're really almost starting from scratch. And so what we've done over the process of the past year or so is put together a set of goals for this project. And again, safety has risen to the top as the #1 goal or priority for people, everyone we've talked to. We've developed a set of network principles of spiderwebs and connected neighborhoods, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, and relied on both national and local guidance from the Federal Highway Administration, from Caltrans and NACTO to select the correct facility for the type of roadway. So the wider or less safe a roadway is, the more protected the bike facility is. Narrower, quieter streets get less robust bike facilities. And by putting those together, we've gone through this extensive drafting process. So we started in last August with our first draft. We took that, did an internal review with city staff, presented that to our project development team, and came up with a second draft. We also went to the public and got feedback on that, and then we also presented to the commissions, including you all, and continued to get feedback. And the feedback over and over and over again was, can you do more? We want a more ambitious plan. We want more protection. Can you look at the existing facilities and upgrade those? The Sharrow facilities, the Class 3 facilities, can you upgrade those to bike boulevards? There was a real hunger to be able to bike safely around the city. And so that brings us to tonight, where we have our proposed network, which is safe and connected. It's 90 miles across the city. This means that basically no matter where you are in the city, you will be able to bike safely across the city or to your local or faraway destination, including in adjacent jurisdictions in Los Angeles, Burbank, and the county, the unincorporated areas. And because the city of Glendale has so many wide, dangerous streets, the ones that are highlighted in the crash analysis, all of those streets that are like that have been designated as a Class 4 protected bike lane, right? And so we've created an extensive network of protected bike lanes and sort of filled in between with a lot of bike boulevards and, typical Class 2 or bike facilities. That's your striped bike lane. And so having put together a proposed network, we then created a phasing for the network over 20 years, right? And again, this is a 20-year plan. This will not change overnight. And when you think about everything that's changed in the past 20 years since 2004, which feels like several lifetimes ago, and you think ahead, what will the next 20 years bring? This, hopefully, in addition to, a lot of other change, it will also bring a connected and safe bike network for the city of Glendale. And so we've put together a 4-phase plan that each phase is assumed to be 5 years long. I just want to make the caveat that regardless of whatever phase a project is in, if there are other opportunities in the future to do that project earlier because there's other street projects or funding becomes available, then obviously that project should be advanced with that other project. You shouldn't wait 15 years or 20 years to do the last project if there's other opportunities to do that sooner. And that the phases were based on first, creating a core network, connecting each additional phase to that core network or the previous phases. We developed a scoring methodology to prioritize each subsequent project after the first phase. And then we've made adjustments along the way to balance the network geographically, right? South Glendale is pretty ideal for biking for many of the reasons I mentioned earlier. And so if we didn't balance it geographically, you would get all your first projects would be in South Glendale and West Glendale, and then it would sort of slowly trickle up the rest of the way. And so this is a way of making sure that there is a usable network everywhere from the first phase onward. And then a final adjustments were made for each phase to balance complexity and lane miles between the phases, so you're not doing all of your longest or most complex projects in one phase. So it's a real balance, and it's an iterative process. And so, again, our phase one was really focused on creating a usable network in these three primary areas: West Glendale, South Glendale, and North Glendale. And then also leveraging the Metro BRT project that is coming in during this time period. And so, again, we're basing this on a lot of our analysis and the feedback that we've received, but also the network principles of the spider web, which is creating like connections across the city, like these robust connections across the cities, but also the connected neighborhoods where if you're in Kenneth Village or Islands Village, you can bike easily to around your neighborhood. And so this process, which I sort of already just explained, but I'll review, is with our first phase, we wanted to create a usable network that leverages the BRT project and emphasizes local connectivity. And then for the remaining three phases, we did this iterative process of ensuring that the next phase, the subsequent phase, would connect to the previous phase, that would begin to connect out to outer areas and also densify or fill in the network on the inner areas that already have some coverage. We developed a scoring based on project priorities and goals to weight or provide like a weighted score for every project to help identify subsequent phases or projects in each phase. And then we made the adjustments, like I said, based on geographic equity and complexity of each phase. And so the weighted score was based on project goals. And so that includes safety, connectivity, community support, trip potential, trade-offs, and social equity. And then each of these were given a weight. So the weights you'll see, these were ranked according to project priorities based on the surveys we've done, the feedback we've gotten from the various commissions, from the PDT. And then so you can see that if you look at this table here, there's the 6 criteria. They each have a ranking, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you add that together, that's 21. So each point, right, each ranking weight is worth around 4.8 or 5%, right? So safety comes in at 6, so that's 6 times 4.8 is 28.6. That's where these numbers come from, and this is done so that as you multiply the weighting across the scores for each of these criteria, you get a score between 0 and 100. So it's like becomes a nice, easy, clean score, and everything is weighted between 0 and 100. So taking all of that information together, we have developed our phasing, right? And so again, the first phase really emphasizes these connected networks in these 3 primary areas of the city, the north, the west, and the south, and again, leveraging the Metro BRT project. And so you start to get these like connected and usable networks in each of these areas. And the second phase then starts to connect those more, especially from the north to south along Verdugo, and then starts to fill in these areas with more of the bike boulevards and class 2 facilities. And then continue on in the third the third phase, we take on some of these more ambitious projects. This is 10 to 15 years from now, Glendale Avenue and Colorado Street, and again, filling in the network and expanding outward. And finally, filling in these final pieces, you can see that a lot of these projects are on the outer edges, like Chevy Chase up into the canyon, or Mountain and Cumberland, Mark Ridge up in the north end, and then Brand Boulevard, finally. So those are the phases. And then one question we've gotten a lot is, where are these projects going to impact require reconfiguring the street, either removing a parking lane or a travel lane, so that there's enough width for the bike lane or the bike facility. So in general, most class 4 facilities, and those are the protected bike lanes, will require a trade-off, right? Removing or rededicating a travel lane or a parking lane so that you can fit in a class 4 facility. In many cases, the class 2 facility, which again is a traditional just regular striped bike lane, will also require reconfiguring the roadway. And then bike boulevards and class 3 facilities don't really have an impact on that at all because they use other techniques to slow traffic or are only on short segments. And I just want to emphasize here what's said in what's in bold here. Whether a trade-off is ultimately needed will depend on a project design, the site conditions and constraints. Right. We did not go through the entire city and measure every street. This was done, on a citywide scale using desktop research. So, conditions are going to change over time. And so this is a preliminary estimate of where we believe trade-offs could be required. Okay. I'm going to move into non-network recommendations. I've listed them out here. I'm going to walk through these one by one. So I'm not going to read these off now. So first one is regularly collecting data on biking in Glendale. There's currently not a regular count regime. There's also not a regular update to the bike map. So conducting regular bike counts along key bike routes. This will become important, especially as you build out the network. This is really great for before and after data. You could look at Biking Central currently has a class 2 facility. After the Metro BRT project comes in and adds a more robust facility, before and after numbers are really compelling. You can install permanent and automatic bike counters along these corridors. That is useful information, but also very public information. These counters have a digital screen. They say how many people bike by that year or that day. And so that can also encourage people to bike. And then encouraging people to bike by tracking the number of trips that they take by bike instead of driving or just in general, and this could be something that could be compared with Earth Day in April or Bike Month in May. And then maintaining updated bike network map and information. Again, the bike map is not regularly updated at the moment. So keeping that regularly up to date, distributing regular up-to-date maps, and then keeping regular up-to-date GIS files. Those are your geographic information system files, just so that, this is all very easy and available, both to city staff and to the public. Provide convenient and accessible bike parking throughout Glendale, creating a portal for residents to request bike parking, expand bike parking at key destinations, and then working with the school system to provide more bike parking at schools. Incorporating bike facilities into new developments, enforcing current zoning requirements that do require bike facilities and bike parking, updating the zoning code to require more bike parking, and exchange in some cases you could exchange that for regular car parking, and then adding bike facilities and bike incentives as part of the transportation demand and trip reduction measures for these new developments as well. Pilot active transportation projects. So a lot of cities use pilots to test projects and also as a public engagement tool. You can go out there with quick build and low cost materials to change a street for a day, a weekend, a week, a couple of weeks or a month, depending on what you're after and also the robustness of the materials. You can, again, do before and after counts. You can do community events around these and, see what people think, at the beginning or at the end. And that can all be really important and helpful data as you design projects, and you can make adjustments along the way. I would say that the Brand Boulevard, the North Brand Boulevard project, north of Glen Oaks, is sort of a more robust version of this, or rather like more permanent version of this. I'm talking, which is, taking a while because it is requiring, more robust materials, but you can do this using traffic cones, hay bales, spray chalk, movable planters. So there's a lot of ways that cities around the country have done this to test changes to the street. And then incorporate bike network implementation and maintenance into regular road repairs. I started to talk about this earlier, implementing projects as they come up as part of other road projects, whether that's a repaving or other, utility work. Adopt an accelerated pavement maintenance schedule for roads with prioritized bike network improvements. What that basically means is roads that do have bike facilities get priority for repavings and other maintenance. Develop a maintenance plan for roads with existing bike networks, bike facilities, and then, have a portal in which people can report issues like potholes or other problems with bike facilities. That could be paired with like a bike parking request as well. Outreach and education, super important. Cycling events like Ciclovia, City of LA does that, where you could have closed streets and you have like an organized ride and people take over the street and they can walk and they can bike, and you can have dance events and all sorts of community activities out in the street, offering bike related programs like workshops and classes, and then campaigns to promote awareness about people biking in the city, bike safety, rights and responsibilities of people using the street, both people walking, biking, and driving. Lowering speed limits. It has been shown over, it is fact that the faster a car is going, the more severe a crash it will be, and the lower the likelihood of someone surviving. So it's reducing speed limits and designing roads for slower speeds has a huge safety benefit. People have more time to react. And then if they do hit something or someone, there is less momentum and less of a likelihood of severe injury or death. And state law now allows localities to designate safety corridors and reduce speed limits. In the past, state law has basically set a floor on what your speed limits can be based on how fast people are going. And accommodating that, and that has been, corrected, and now you can use state law to lower speed limits around the city, and then also expanding school zones so that you can lower speed limits even further, which has again a huge safety benefit. One thing that we talked a lot about with the Planning Commission and the Sustainability Commission was sidewalk riding. Currently, the city does not allow riding on sidewalks in business districts. California Vehicle Code does allow localities to set their own rules about sidewalk riding. Sidewalk riding, especially in a city like Glendale, where there is not a usable bike network and people don't feel safe getting around, but you still have people that are biking. I want to emphasize that people are biking in the city, even now. And so people do often ride on sidewalks because they don't feel safe in the street. So by legalizing that or permitting that, on sidewalks, even in downtowns, when it's not disruptive to pedestrians, is a proactive safety measure for people who are biking now. And also reduces the risk of uneven enforcement for people that are riding on sidewalks because they don't have another choice or they don't feel safe in the street. I just want to point out that your adjacent or that your neighboring cities of Burbank, Pasadena, and of course the city of LA also allow sidewalk riding. Prohibiting vehicles from right on red. So right on red has inherent safety issues. People are turning right, but they're looking left. That means you're not looking at the direction that you're turning, so you don't know if there's someone walking that way or biking that way. And then you're crossing over the direction in which people are walking or biking. And then often people will creep up or sometimes not even stop and treat it more like a yield. And so you're then blocking the crosswalk for people who do want to cross, right? And in the 70s and 80s, federal money was tied to allowing right turns on red. And so when that happened, there was a dramatic increase in crashes at intersections. Intersections in general are also the least safe part of the roadway. It's where there's all the different movements as opposed to, you know, just like straight on segments. And so in states across the country, crashes dramatically increased when right turns on red were allowed. So what we're recommending here is that as the bike network is built out, you consider banning right on reds either at specific intersections, along specific corridors, or in general areas, right? And I think that that will be determined in the future as the network is built out and you know, the ecosystem of biking and walking and driving in Glendale changes. So we can't make a specific geographic recommendation here, but I think it's a really important tool in the toolbox to improve safety for all road users is banning right turns on red and being very clear about where you're doing that, right? Like having proper signage. If it's really just at one intersection, you know, being really clear about that. If it's all the full city, you know, having that at the city boundaries. If it's just in downtown, having that, you know, throughout downtown. So, you know, communication is also a really important piece of that, and also communicating why you're doing it. Again, this is a really beneficial safety measure for all road users. And so that's the second recommendation about raising awareness around where this is happening and why. And then adopting guidelines for reconfiguring streets, which is going to be, again, another really powerful tool in your toolbox of how to implement these safety projects and these bike projects throughout the city. So in other cities, including the city of LA, they have these guidelines for when you can do a road reconfiguration or a road diet, right? You're converting what is often a 4-lane road to a 3-lane road with a center turn lane. They're basically when there is the volumes on the street are lower than the capacity, right? So there's excess capacity. You don't need all this roadway. And so by reconfiguring the street, you're making it safer for people walking and biking and driving. You're making, you're adding bike facilities. And then oftentimes roadways operate better, right? You have a center turn lane instead of people turning left from their left lane and blocking the left lane. And what this has shown, what has been shown by doing this, you know, again, this is on roadways where the idea behind this recommendation is when you have volumes that don't justify the width of the roadway. There's going to be plenty of streets in Glendale where the volumes are really high and you're going to have to do additional studies. This is to short circuit that analysis and say, well, your volumes are really low, your street is really wide. You should implement this project now. And so creating those thresholds for doing that instead of having to do an extensive study and outreach process for every single project, right? There are certain projects that are going to have immediate safety benefits and not impact traffic. And so that's what these thresholds are, is to identify what those projects are and what the standards are for that. And so in cities across California, including Pasadena and Santa Monica and LA, these types of street projects have reduced crashes anywhere from 20 to 60%. That's a massive safety benefit. It's also led to better emergency response times because you have that center turn lane. No one's blocking it if you have your sirens on. And so you can zoom down the center turn lane instead of being stuck in 4 lanes of traffic, 2 lanes in each direction, right? So the policy or the recommendation here is to create, look at figuring out what the criteria and those thresholds are. Looking at the Federal Highway Administration standards, which are listed here. City of LA has extensive guidelines that could also serve as a model, an early model that could be adjusted for the city's, for Glendale's unique context. And then using those standards to streamline some of these projects, again, on roadways where the volumes don't justify the width, the volume. And then finally, improving bike safety at intersections. Oftentimes, it's easy to give up at the intersection. You stripe a bike lane, and then as soon as you get to the intersection, the bike lane disappears. And we, so striping bike lanes up and through and to and through the intersection, relying on federal or national guidance to improve facilities at the intersection, like bike boxes. And then one thing we've heard a lot is about detection devices. Oftentimes, or throughout Glendale, really, at intersections, the loop detectors, this is this like metal loop that's in the ground. If you pull up on top of it in a car, it detects you're there and the light will eventually change. If you're in on a bicycle, it doesn't know you're there and then the light will never change, and then you're forced to cross the intersection against the light eventually if it's ever safe and clear to do so. So adjusting those devices and using other types of technologies to allow lights to detect cyclists, the presence of cyclists, so the light will change and people can bike through the intersection. And a lot of this is geometric design or just like design. And so we've also put together some pretty basic design guidelines for the city. Again, you don't have much in terms of bike facilities. So we've put together some design guidelines about all these different types of bike facilities and intersection tools and references to local and national guidance on how to implement this. I'm not going to walk through the details of this design guidance, but it does exist, and so I just want to make you aware that we have put that together as the city begins to build out a more robust bike network. You're going to really want to see what works and what the standards are. So before we get into questions, I just want to quickly go over next steps. We're at the end of March, and you are the last presentation that we're doing here in March. We'll be taking this feedback and incorporating it before we go to City Council in April. And then we will be entering the CEQA analysis. That's the environmental review. That'll take about 4 to 6 weeks. And then the environmental review, the CEQA analysis, and the draft plan will go through a 30-day public comment period. We think that will probably start mid-May and go till mid-June. And then comments will be collated and incorporated as appropriate into a final plan, at which point that will be presented finally to City Council for adoption. So I realize that was probably very long for you, but I think that the details of these final recommendations are really important. And I really wanted to spend the time emphasizing some of the nitty-gritty of this, and also the benefits that this will have, not just for people biking, but all road users in Glendale. So thank you.
Thank you so much. What I'm thinking is just kind of setting the table here. I know that we don't have a motion that we're looking to create. It's really a chance to share feedback and also hear some comments. There may be members that have called in, members of the public. That's a question. Sorry, that wasn't phrased like a
We don't
question.
have any speakers at this
No
time.
speakers. Everyone's just satisfied. Excellent. So maybe we can start off. I know that there's probably questions, there's probably comments. I don't think it's necessary to kind of create some buckets. I know that I have a lot of both comments and questions. But I do think it was at the level of detail, just to comment on that was excellent. You had us all. We were all with you the whole time, and I know that we read the staff report as well that had some nuggets of information not contained in here. I'm happy to kick it off. I'm happy to send it to someone else to have some questions or comments. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a lot of questions. Well, first of all, thank you, the entire team, committee, Arizu, Fred, and then Sam's team for working on this. And I was honored to be part of the committee along with my colleague, Commissioner Lester, so thank you very much. So I will start with the question, where it says other recommendations, I'm trying to understand, is this is not incorporated in the original plan, but this is just to take into consideration after the plan is adopted, is that correct?
Perhaps the phrasing is a little misleading. It's called other because it's non-network recommendations. So the primary, the big focus has throughout this process has been the network, developing the draft of the network and then the phasing of the network. And so these are the recommendations that are not directly related to that, right? So those are policy recommendations and design recommendations that come as part of the bike plan. So I think we can clarify that instead of maybe calling it other recommendations doesn't give it due justice.
They're like supplemental.
To me,
Yeah.
because it's not clear whether those things are going to be done, not done. This is something that sounds reasonable, but it has nothing to do with the original plan that's going to be adopted. So yeah, I would truly appreciate if this could have more clarification. So I'll start with the rest of the questions on the point 3 page. There is a part when it talks about bicycle parking. Since this entire bicycle transportation planning started, I was trying to get information, and I had mentioned a couple of times that I would like to find out whether the buildings that we have here in Glendale, the new buildings, the ones that have already been constructed, if those have designated bicycle parkings, and if we are implementing them, we are enforcing them to have something, because even if they have, it's like very few, and it's not possible to find it unless you like really go search for it. So I don't know if this information has been gathered or if this has been taken into consideration. So I would like to know more about that. Sam?
That's phrased as a question.
Yeah, I mean, do you guys have any information? Let's say like the building that I live in, it's one of the kind of considered new buildings. And when I tried to find where the bicycle parkings are, you can't find it. I mean, they say it's minus 3rd floor, like underground somewhere, I don't know, not next to, not somewhere that is convenient, So I want to know if you guys have any information on that. If you don't, then why we don't have that? If we do, then is anything that is part of this plan that we can enforce those buildings to have it? Because somewhere there I noticed new buildings and new developments, but what about the ones that are very big and already we have those buildings and people live in those already and they already have parking structures, and I don't know anything that's going to be done about it.
Yeah, so we do not have any sort of citywide data about the existing building stock and their indoor bike parking. What we did hear, from you and the PDT and others is that there seems to be a lack of enforcement around these zoning rules and these requirements. And so that was why these policies were included. But we don't have a policy necessarily about remedying existing building stock, but it sounds like that might be something that you're asking for.
Yeah, can we gather that information?
Plan.
Yeah, can we gather that information? Can we maybe incorporate it in the plan? Because, I don't know, that's something that every day you see new buildings coming up, and until that plan is implemented, even like phase 1, we're still gonna have a lot of buildings around the city, especially in the center, which don't have it, or the ones that exist. So if we can actually get that information and incorporate it in the plan. I don't know if what my colleagues think
Well,
about it.
I'm
but-
wondering if you're looking at, so this is recommendation number 4. Under policies, it does say enforce requirements for bicycle parking. And so I wonder if part of what you're saying is existing buildings that may or may not have bicycle parking.
Yeah, but first we need to get that information,
Yeah.
right? We don't have that information, and it's part of the recommendation. I mean, why don't we just get that information? It has to be collected,
Well, I
right?
imagine, and this is kind of going to a question that I had about what it means, these other recommendations, which I understand are supplemental policies and other things to consider that would help with the network. Are these being proposed to council, and then they will approve all the recommendations? I imagine it's also within our wheelhouse to say, you know, I love this one and not the other one. And it sounds like you're saying that number 4 seems really important, but also understanding what the kind of the audit, like what we currently have that's not even being enforced or understood. And on that point, I actually had a question too, because I know the city of LA does have a bike parking ordinance, and I think you alluded to it in the staff report, where you were allowed to swap out a certain number of car parking, and it has a lot of provisions about where it's located. So to your point, it has to be, and this is true for electric vehicle parking too, accessible, very well seen. You know, bike parking in particular was known for being placed in obscure places within the building, but in proximity to elevators and other things that are very useful. Is this saying that there is currently no requirement, or is this saying that there is a requirement in downtown specific plan zone for bike parking? Out of curiosity, what's the current rule? Do you happen to know that?
No, there is currently a requirement.
Okay.
Yes, there are provisions in the downtown specific plan for bike parking. Yes. I do not know what they are off the top of my head.
Thank you.
So my comment would be, my question, the buildings that the commissioner mentioned before that do not have parking facilities for the existing bicyclists at that building. So if this goes through and passes, are we going to impose those building owners to switch the regular car parkings to bicycle parkings? Or are they going to be required, let's say, to produce 100 bicycle stalls or spots? Is this something that we're recommending for the city council to consider or not?
I don't think that we have not developed like a specific remedy for buildings that are not currently meeting their requirements. I think that, you know, I think that's sort of beyond the scope of this. And I think going back to the previous question, a lot of these policies are recommendations for them that would then be changes, say, to city code or new policies, right? And so this is a planning document. So by adopting the planning document, you're endorsing the creation or of those policies by whatever, you know, either administrative or legal mechanism, but it is not the actual creation of that policy, right?
Yeah, that's such a
So,
good point, because it is
And
kind
I
of,
think
oh, sorry, I'm talking over you. It is kind of laying the framework for setting it as a priority, but the council then would have to then agree that this is a priority, and then separate from that, really create a motion to initiate a work program that was, for example, updating the zoning code to reflect, you know, a change in bicycle parking.
exactly. By adopting this plan, you would not be changing the zoning code. It would be an endorsement of the idea that the zoning code should be updated, right? And I think that's important because that is how these planning documents work. And then that is what council members, commission members, members of the public, advocates can then point to and say, well, the plan endorses this and you haven't done it yet. Or, you know, what do we want to do about X, Y, or Z? Oh, let's look at the planning document. That is what, you know, we intended to set out and do. So that's why these recommendations and policies are important, but they're not a change to city code when the plan is adopted.
My concern is, for example, number 8, lower speed limits, or number 9, and penalties for bicycle safety measures when it talks about permitting sidewalk biking. I mean, I also drive car, even though I'm very passionate about bicycle, alternative mode of transportation. But I mean, speed limit is in Glendale. I mean, I'm not a planner, but to my understanding, is very reasonable. And the only speed limit higher than 35, if I'm not mistaken, is on Glen Oaks. So the rest of the places, I mean, it is reasonable, and we don't want, at the same time, if we're trying to make everything comfortable for walking and biking, we don't want to make it miserable for drivers as well. So, and or the permitting the sidewalk biking. I mean, city of Glendale's sidewalks are already pretty narrow. If we're putting this as part of the recommendation, my concern is we need to take into consideration what we already have before putting it into recommendations. That's what I'm trying to, that's the point I'm trying to make. Arno, is it clear? If it's not, I'll
It is
try
clear,
to
yeah.
elaborate. So that's my only concern. I mean, to my understanding is what right now we're trying to review and what is going to go to city council is basically phase 1 to 5, which is just basically where we're going to be having the classes of bicycle ways, right? So basically, whether it's going to be class 1, class 2, class 3, that's what's going to be approved and adopted by city council at what, in the end of May? Yeah, in June. Is that correct? So all the recommendations, basically, it's just there, just in case if something comes up to see if that's something that can be implemented. Is that correct?
You might want to answer it, but I think it's both. I think that primarily we're looking at the bike lane, like the mapping and the phasing, and this is really to agree with the phasing concept and kind of laying that out, knowing that those details also have to be worked out later time. But then also, and I agree, we're seeing it for the first time, right? But the recommendations sound like they're also policy concepts that they're asking for our buy-in and therefore the council buy-in to do at a later date without the details.
Well, okay, yeah, what I don't agree with is the recommendations not being supported by current data and cases and whatever we have, having recommendations there, not having that data and information and what we have as a case study. So that's my only concern.
Like, would you be more comfortable if it was phrased like, consider looking at this, not a directive about what
Not
to?
even consider. Why is it even there? If we are saying let's have new developments and have bike parkings, more bike parkings, we probably need to have all the data on how many bike parkings each building has, the ones that have been constructed before, the ones that are being constructed now, whatever potential, I don't know, like architectural plans are there to be approved to be constructed, everything. If we're talking about lowering speed limits, we probably should have like all the speed limits or whatever we have in the city, like the school zones and everything. What do we have? Why are we suggesting that possibly there can be cases of lowering the speed limit? Or sidewalk biking, like where are the sidewalks? Or potentially, what sidewalk do we think that can be permitted to bike? I mean, all these things. If we're trying to understand the streets, where can we have bicycle roadways, then we need to understand all those things too. To me, bicycle transportation plan should include everything in detail versus just the map and then the other recommendations. I don't think even the recommendations should be there. So that's my subjective opinion.
I'm thinking too, because I work in a sister agency to this, I think sometimes what's helpful for staff and the city is to see an initiation for something. So for them to like start it as a work program to do that research, it usually comes with the council saying, go look at this, like, or create an ordinance to go look at this with the studies. I think I could imagine for the purpose of this, that's hard to get into those level of details, especially what if this doesn't get started for another 10 years? So I'm imagining they're setting this up to try to get like the general okay to move forward with an eventual work program that would have much more details. But they can answer that better than I would. I'm just estimating.
Okay, does Sam have anything to say about this?
Yeah, so regarding bicycle riding on sidewalks. The recommendation is to, like, Pasadena and Burbank, to allow bike riding on sidewalks where it is not disruptive, when it is not disruptive to pedestrians. So currently the city does not allow it in downtown areas at all, which, it makes it the only city, among LA, Burbank, and Pasadena that does that. And so again, this is just, look, you have local control over this, and the city has just, at one point decided to ban sidewalk riding in downtown. And what this recommendation is saying is allow that when it is not disruptive to pedestrians. Right, so that's the bike riding, that's the sidewalk question. For the speed limits, this is a state law that allows, again, local control to set speed limits. And speed is directly correlated to safety and severity of crashes. So lowering your speed limits can have a major impact on safety. And where you have issues of speeding, it's not just your speed limits, but it's also roadway design that indicates speeding, so that this becomes, part of redesigning roadways so that drivers are less likely to speed, and then also having an enforcement mechanism to reduce speeding.
Go ahead.
One of the questions that I have, see all these new buildings that it's been erected here in city of Glendale, they all invite a lot of cars. The congestion level is going to go higher. So the traffic is going to be even worse. And having said that, to implement a plan like this, do we have a cost analysis for every one of these phases that it's being implemented at this point? And if it is, what happens if one of the phases doesn't work and it needs to be removed? What is the cost for that if you need to retract it and put it back the way that it was? And there were cases in Glendale that had happened. So I want to know if that you have that under consideration or not. And I just like to see exactly how much, as the commissioner mentioned before, is that we need to know all of these facts before we recommend anything to the city of Glendale, to the council. So do you happen to have those data by any chance?
So we do have a draft cost analysis that is going through internal review with city staff right now. So we're not able yet to share that. And then the phasing, I just want to emphasize that phasing is, here we are sitting at year 0, basically, right? And we're trying to project out into the future what the order in which we think things should be built. I know that the future will not be the same as what I think it is now, right? So like the phasing is a recommendation, but it is not written in stone. And so projects will be built when they make sense in the time period, in the current time. So it's very likely that the phases will not be built, and each individual project will not be built in the exact order that we are currently recommending it. I think what is important is that projects are built in a logical manner that take advantage of contemporaneous funding opportunities, other roadway projects, and then also create a safe and connected network. So we can't, on one hand, we can't hand you 120 bike projects and say, go ahead and build it. On the other hand, we are offering a recommended phasing that we know won't be the exact order in which things are built because of all of the unknowns in the future, right?
See, and my last question would be, do we have a plan to maintain, let's say, if we have this bike lanes, because I just recently rode my bike, the one goes towards Pasadena. There were a lot of trash and debris along the way on the bike path, and I actually had to come off of my bike, remove it to be able to continue riding. Is there any plan of maintaining and cleaning those bike paths just in case so they don't create more accidents?
Yeah, as part of the cost estimate, there's also maintenance costs involved. And then, your regular street maintenance and cleaning should also address the bike facilities. And maybe that, it sounds like perhaps we should make that more explicit in one of these policies about regular maintenance as part of your regular street maintenance.
Indeed.
I'll maybe, just because adding on, thinking of some of the comments that you had and therefore some of the responses, but back to the network itself and kind of the beginning of the presentation, I do really appreciate you walking us through the thought process, which I think made a lot of sense in terms of looking at the weighted scores for consideration. I had to kind of reassess in my brain, knowing that this is a priority plan. It's like something different. It's like 5 steps before kind of laying out a priority plan, but of course, actual implementation, which we've voted on some projects similar to that, is really dependent in the future on funding, future studies, lots of other things. I think that's helpful to know because most of the phasing made a lot of sense to me, but I will say some, I was worried, why are they in such a later phase if they were noted as one of the high crash streets? Like if you look at that first, and maybe I can reference some bicycle crash analysis, your sheet labeled that, and I think you had a little bit more detail in the staff report, but when you look at that map, it doesn't necessarily, like when I look at that, I think the dark red, oh my goodness, those are the areas where there's a lot of injuries, and I see, you described why we came up with then the phasing. Glendale Avenue in particular looks to me like if that can at all happen in an earlier phase, that seems like a priority just based on the bicycle crash analysis. But again, I appreciate the sentiment for setting out a kind of a rationale to figure out how to prioritize these, knowing that it's going to take place over the course of 20 years and there's going to be a lot of consideration. Maybe from that.
I'm happy to
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
address Glendale. Oh, I'm sorry. Specifically with Glendale Ave, it is one thing we are currently working on, and I will say that the phasing is still draft, right? So we do welcome and appreciate your feedback on the phasing specifically. And we're currently working with the Department of Public Works to reconcile their capital improvement program, their 5-year capital improvement program with our phasing plan so that projects, as I keep emphasizing, projects that can take advantage of a repaving or other types of projects are prioritized even if they're not in the current phase, say. So Glendale Avenue is in the upcoming 5-year capital improvement program.
Great.
However, as I keep saying, Glendale does not have a bike network right now, and implementing these projects will become easier over time as you build a constituency, as the city becomes better acquainted with the design and the process of the analysis and community outreach, right? Like this isn't, I recognize that this is a bike plan, but there's a lot of work that comes after this, right? And this is the city will be doing much of this for the first time. And I think, knowing what I know about other cities, you're going to go through fits of community pushback, and it will require a lot of political will to implement this. So balancing that first phase with projects that are really important and will have a large impact, but aren't all of the hardest projects at once.
Kind of starting with low-hanging fruit,
as if,
or beginning with like pilot kind of areas.
Not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but also not all of the most difficult projects at once. I agree with you. If you look at the crash map and the safety corridors, there are 10 streets that just pop out in red, and but I also cannot in good conscience recommend to you that over the next 5 years you put protected bike lanes on Glendale, on Colorado, on Central, on Brand, on Glen Oaks, on Pacific, on San Fernando, right? Like it is a huge amount of work, and it'll be the first time you're doing this. And I think part of the logic of the phasing plan is to break that apart and into more reasonable chunks. That does not mean that Glendale, could be included in phase one, but we would want to then think about, what are the implications for some of the other current phase one or phase two projects, and do we want to swap those around?
Mm-hmm. And even consideration for like percentage cutoffs. Like I was surprised, like there was some, again, I'm kind of pulling from memory with the staff report, but there's some that have, based on the weighted criteria, something like 20%, but they're still in phase one. It might come to, during that time frame, then it's ruled out as a high priority because of the percentage. Or it might be ruled up because we happen to be doing other infrastructure improvements at the same time.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that phase one did not rely on the weighted score. It was really about creating core networks
I
in
see.
those three areas that would work. And then the weighted score was used to develop phases 2, 3, and 4.
Oh, I think okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I read that and I don't think it connected in my brain, so thank you. I also really
Okay,
appreciated.
we
Oh,
can
go
make
ahead.
that clearer. Oh, I was just saying, I'm just noting that we'll make that clearer in the future.
Okay, thank you. I think that you reflected a lot of, in the staff report, safety data that we had asked for in particular, so I appreciate that. It was kind of fascinating to look at, I don't know if, my colleagues agree that some of the statewide kind of trends, and not that you are in a position to reflect on like why, but I was sort of curious knowing that 2018 had such a low number of crashes. Like I was trying to think of like what would account for that. Is there any sentiment on like a policy change, or is that, does anyone know why we would have gone and we've progressively gone down in terms of injury crashes?
Yeah, I mean, based on the available data, it is not possible to definitively draw a conclusion between, of causation here. City staff have pointed out that in 2018, there was a concerted education campaign around road safety. So that is a potential contributing factor. I just want to say that, the crash data is multivariate. It is often incomplete. And so it is very difficult to draw direct, cause and effect. What is clear is that the number of crashes involving cyclists in the city has declined over time. What's not clear is why, and I would suspect, and I just want to be very clear, this is my personal opinion. I think that is probably because fewer people are biking because they feel less safe biking on Glendale streets, not because the streets have become safer. I think the streets have probably become less safe,
Yeah.
especially post-pandemic, during and post-pandemic. And
Yeah, I
so
was
fewer
wondering
people are
that
biking.
too, and I wonder if there's a way to reflect, because I know that we're looking at like per capita, but it's not quite the same as bicycle users, right? Because that's kind of an
Right.
interesting numbers
That's
really to
called an
understand.
exposure rate.
Okay.
Right. Yes, and so that's called an exposure rate, right? And so for that, you need detailed volume data, and you would say, per 100,000 cyclists or per 10,000 cyclists, crash rates have gone up or down. We unfortunately don't have that data, so we're only able to present the trends as we've presented them, which is basically citywide.
Okay, thank you. I have more questions and comments, but I want to pause and offer the table to anyone else who may be sick of hearing me speak. No. Everyone, go, please.
So when it comes to the other recommendations, I do understand that they are kind of hypotheticals, things to be considered by city council or otherwise. But something that I was just wondering about is, because obviously there's no timeline for these other recommendations because they still will be under consideration. And like Commissioner Avagian was saying, like they will still be under research and to kind of understand like the actual impact that they will have. But I suppose my question is, should some or all of these things kind of progress and be implemented in some way, is there kind of a plan to delineate between the impact of the actual physical bike network and these more like policy-oriented changes? Just because I know obviously this 20-year plan with 4 different phases, it will be like kind of under continued growth. And I think should these other recommendations happen, like, is there kind of a way to distinguish between the impacts of these versus the actual implementation of the network?
I think it's an important point about measuring before and after, right? Like whether that's number of bike racks or, crash rates, or parking in buildings or incidents on sidewalks, whatever, but measuring before and after data, which is mentioned in a couple of the policies specifically, is a really important way of measuring the impact of each of these individual policies. I also just want to note that a bike plan is not just what is represented on the map and your future network. These policies are vital to supporting a safe and biking atmosphere in Glendale, right? You could build this whole network and do nothing else, and people will definitely bike, right? If you build it, they will come. But these policies come hand in hand with the bike plan to encourage biking, to make it safer, to make it more accessible, to educate people around the safety issues. So I don't see them as separate, right? They complement one another.
And then I suppose as a really quick follow-up, should things like the right turn on red or speed limits be altered in some way? Would that then kind of change how the network would progress in like later phases? Should those things happen like earlier on in the next 20 years?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have an answer. It's really hard to say how. I can tell you that the phasing will probably change over time. I cannot tell you in what ways or if A happens, Z should happen, or if B happens, then X should happen. Right? There's not like a decision tree that comes with this that says like advance these projects or these phases if non-network policies are implemented. Again, I think they're all supportive of one another. I think as far as the like physical network goes, you don't want to build projects that are scattered and half a mile here and a block here and a quarter block there that don't connect, right? And so the phasing really emphasizes connectivity. And I think in the future, yeah, you will build some projects that probably don't connect to anything in the immediate because funding was available or whatever the case may be. But then in future phases, if that happens, you will want to prioritize projects that then connect that facility to the rest of the network. So as I've started to answer your question, I think I've come up with at least one scenario in which you would want to reprioritize projects to, again, emphasize connectivity. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to just add something to that. I think that's why there's actually the importance of that first one, which is regularly collect data on bicycling, right? So if we are making policy implementation changes, we're being able to reflect in kind of real time what's starting to make a difference. Because I think you're right, it's impossible to project out what the 20-year mark is really going to look like because you're going to have a myriad of things changing in the meantime. So I do really appreciate the first two in particular because I think that's really important. Yes?
Just because it seems like during this implementation of the phases, we're gonna need to continuously collect data. I'm trying to understand, are we gonna part ways with Sam's team right after City Council adopts the bicycle transportation plan and a city department is gonna be in charge of collecting the data on crashes, bicycling, or Sam's team is going to be responsible for ongoingly, I don't know, once in a while doing monitoring or measuring things?
So, Commissioner, this is Daniel.
Your city department.
Sam, I'll kick it back to you. So, as you can see, this is a multi-phase approach. Some of these recommendations cover multiple departments. At the end of the day, this is a planning document. And from once it's adopted by the city council, then from a capital improvement perspective, the implementation, then the public works takes that. But again, this is just a planning document. We would then do further research in terms of actual studies to see if these proposed recommendations can actually be implemented.
Thank you very much, Mr.
If you want
Hernandez.
to add to that.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that your various city departments regularly, collect data on all sorts of things, whether it's trash collected or your PD safety data on crashes or speeding or or traffic volumes, you have regular traffic volume counts. So that would be, those responsibilities would be taken on by the respective city agency that's, as part of your regular traffic counts, conduct regular pedestrian and bicycle counts, right? I think part of the problem is that those counts do happen occasionally, and this is just, so these things are already happening. It's more about doing it regularly so you can better measure the impact and also know where, there are issues.
Thank you very much.
I just have a few comments. I'd like to echo my colleague to say thank you to Fred and Arzu and Sam and the rest of the members of the development team. I feel like this is an impressive and ambitious planning document. Sort of still at the beginning of the sort of public process. And as I said, I don't have that many comments. Overall, I'm pleased that our elected representatives have prioritized this, and an all ages ability bicycle network that can not coerce anybody to bike, but to allow people to bike as an instrument of freedom. And as a way to, over time, let Glendale continue to become a vibrant city that supports the goals of safety, public health, vibrant, economic, active streets. I think there is, when you're talking about the apportionment of public space and long-term plans, it's real important to keep in mind our values as a community, what people consider to be important, being able to stand up for what we feel, basically to make prioritizations that take everyone into account. I don't think that it's controversial to say that everyone wants a safe street in front of their home. Everyone likes the idea of a city where your kids can ride around without you sort of hovering over them. And this is, I think, the path. It's ambitious, but it takes place over time. And I think the way it's phased can help make that transition smooth. So yeah, in terms of what we have here in front of us, I also was gonna mention the resurfacing schedule and phasing. I was gonna mention Glendale, those which has been talked about to some degree. It seems like that will be coming up well before phase 3. And it would be nice to get some of the busier ones in there sooner. I also strongly approve of this, I was number 11, the adoption of guidelines for lane reconfiguration. It seems great to sort of hammer out the process so that this doesn't have to be involved to the point of being unproductive, or just to make the process something orderly that people can understand and relate to. We've had, cases where, I mean, I guess I'm thinking of East Glen Oaks where, you can actually have lane reconfigurations without major impacts, not major impacts to traffic volumes, and you can get a big community benefit by making safe facilities for another mode. So those are my main two comments. I'll just, on my colleagues' comments, like, I do support the idea of like looking at speed limits, especially within the context of the downtown. A lot of big cities are looking at like very low speed limits, 20 miles per hour. It's hard to like, if you look at that graphic, it's hard to really like downplay how big of a difference it makes to the human body, the speed of the cars. I mean, the graphic says it all. And then there's the issue of how many vehicles are actually obeying the speed limit. I mean, as a driver, I find that I tend to drive the speed that the cars around me are going, and you have to consciously, focus on where's that speed limit sign, how fast am I going? You're going with the flow. So that's where this idea of street design comes in, street safety. So, I mean, I really would support that. I think, like, it's true that going the speed limit feels kind of slow sometimes, but when you think about what's at stake, there's reason to make that a priority, I think. And one other comment about like the multifamily, the addition of population to the city of Glendale. I mean, in my view, I really see this plan as fundamental to basically facing the future of a city that does want to grow and does want to invite people to live here. You have with transportation, the issues you have with congestion, it's essentially a geometry problem, space. The demand for moving around exceeds the supply, and despite almost 90 years of attempts to make more space for cars, create ways to limit delayed cars, there isn't a city in the world that does not struggle with congestion. Every city that you go to, there's cars that are going slow because there's so many of them. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is to make the other modes a little more appealing, like public transportation, buses, trains, bikes, and most of all, walking in the city. So when you talk about adding more people, this is the way, this is a good way to look at that, is say, not only is it possible, it's attractive. It's attractive to take your bike half a mile, if you have to take a close trip, So that's my view on that. Those are my comments for now. Thank you. I'm really I'm pleased with what I see. So that's it.
Yeah, I'd like to echo, thank you. It's quite a lot of work. It's been a 2-year period. And for me, a lot of my questions kind of have to do with data and data collection in terms of preparing for this report over the past 2 years. There were a lot of comments regarding anecdotal data, and then some of the stuff that we just don't know because it's not tracked. So I do have a couple of questions. As far as the crash analysis data, was there any determination of and I imagine in the vast majority of cases it's probably the car, but was there any analysis of who was at fault in these crashes?
Fault data is sometimes tracked in crash reports. We often don't look at it because it is subjective and heavily weighted against people who are not driving. So, and what is actually more important and for our purposes is where are there crashes? What are the general conditions that lead to those crashes? And where those conditions exist elsewhere so that you can prevent crashes in those locations even before the data shows that it is unsafe. So what are the crash indicators, in the physical environment or otherwise that make this a high crash location, and where does that exist elsewhere so that you can then prevent crashes? Because even if something is unsafe, it doesn't mean that there's necessarily crash data there yet.
I appreciate that. And sure.
I'm just butting in here, and I apologize, but I had the same question. And when I look at, in the staff report on the crash behaviors, I think is what it's called, Table 4, most common vehicle code violation categories, and then it talks about the violation category. Are we to assume, I mean, like wrong side of road, I had the same question, like who was on the wrong side of road, or do we know? But that seems pretty important too. Because we're either solving for, and maybe some of the solutions are the same, but whether it's the bicyclist, improper turning, or the car, it seems like that it would be helpful to know. But based on that, these all sound like vehicles, or excuse me, cars in particular, automobiles. So for this table, sorry, this is my actual question. So for this table, is it known which of the two, if it was a bicycle or it was the car, may have been charged with a code violation?
I do not want to misspeak about this because I know that this is a really important point, and I remembered we did discuss this when we did this crash analysis 14 or 16 months ago. Not you and I, we didn't discuss this, but we did discuss this with city staff. So I just want to make sure that I get you the right answer, because it has come up, and so I will get back to you and get the answers to Fred and Arzu so that they can get that answer to you.
Yeah, and just continuing on some of the questions I have about the way the report was, how we got to this plan. So the bicycle crash density map that we see, what is that relative to? Crash density relative to what? The accidents that were reported in Glendale? Or is there some measure of bicycle crash density being high, medium, or low that you are following, over the entire state, let's say, or the country?
So the way that map is created is you have 3 general categories of crashes. You have killed or severely injured. So that's the most severe type of crash. You have an injury crash, and then you have a property damage only crash. And so they are then weighted, and so KSI, or killed or severely injured, are weighted much higher than injury and PDO crashes, PDO being property damage only. PDO crashes are a good indicator of where like maybe near misses, but aren't don't include an injury. So anyway, they're weighted, and then what they're done is they're normalized to a roadway segment. So you kind of like move along the roadway segment bit by bit, like quarter mile by quarter mile, and you look at the number of crashes by their severity, where KSI crashes have a higher weight, and then you get the like crash density based on the roadway segment length. So if you have a lot of injury crashes, that will show up as a darker red, or a high, medium, or low, and those are just generalized categories, but there are numbers behind all of this that will then that's like in the mapping data that we've shared with the city, so that So it's not relative to something outside of the city or even like generalized to the city. It's, you know, the amount of crashes that are happening on that specific roadway segment.
Got it.
Weighted for the severity of the crash and then normalized to the length of the segment.
So just so that I'm clear, so the high bicycle crash density areas that are indicated on this map are specific to Glendale's total crash data over the period of time that it's looked at and adjusted for all the weights that you mentioned.
So what it is it's the number of, it's those crashes over the 10-year period, weighted by their severity and then normalized to the length of the segment, right? So, and then you move along the roadway bit by bit. I don't know if you can see my hands, I'm sorry,
Yes.
but like bit by bit by bit. So that you're not saying, oh, there's 10 crashes over a 2-mile corridor, right? So then it gets watered down, or there's 10 crashes over a 1/4-mile corridor, and then it's, you know, concentrated, overly concentrated. And so you move down the corridor bit by bit so that you have a normalized and clear idea of where there is actually a high concentration of crashes by severity. Am I answering your question? It's okay if I'm not.
No, I think we're kind of circling around it because what I'm trying to understand, I get it in terms of how this map was constructed. What I'm trying to understand is that measurement, that density measurement by segment, length of segment, is that something that is standardized across crash data, no matter in terms of bicycle crash density? Is that something that's standardized across the country, across the state, across the county, or is that only something that has a bearing on Glendale's crash statistics?
So you could apply this crash analysis to any roadway or road network in the country. What we actually did is we worked with our project development team to develop the crash methodology. We proposed the crash methodology, and then that was altered with feedback from the PDT. So the methodology itself, you know, there's generalized crash methodology that you would use and propose, and that is usually you're only looking at 5 years of data. So we were asked to look at 10 years of data because the pedestrian plan looked at 10 years of data, and they would, the city staff and PDT wanted a clearer idea of what was happening before the pandemic, right? So, and then again, just to emphasize, to match that with the pedestrian data plan. Then we also a typical crash analysis does not include property damage only crashes. We were asked to include that. So again, to kind of indicate where crashes are happening as maybe near misses, but don't include an injury, right? So kind of get a broader picture. So we incorporated that feedback from city staff and PDT to broaden the scope of this crash analysis specific to Glendale.
Got it. So it is
Regardless
specific.
of how you cut it,
Oh, sorry.
it is relative to itself. No, I'll just say that it's relative to itself, so you're still going to see the peaks and the valleys, the dark reds and the lighter reds.
Right. And I know that last time we spoke about the trends, you know, there was the chart that showed relative crash trends for Glendale versus Los Angeles County, for example. And I had pointed out that the chart was kind of weighted in the sense that the per capita number of crashes in Glendale was some significant number lower than the per capita number of crashes in Los Angeles County. Do you recall that conversation?
I do, yes.
Yeah. And so what I was trying to get a good picture of was if we applied Los Angeles County's crash data, would this crash density map look like this in terms of the number of red streets, high streets, medium streets, or low streets? Or would the manner in which you determined bicycle crash density, given the fact that Glendale has a lower per capita of crash occurrences, bicycle crash occurrences, would this map look different? Would there be more medium or low densities relative to the entire of Los Angeles County? And to be fair, is that even beneficial to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that that's not a helpful analysis. I think, and
Why
I'll
not?
explain why. But first, the LA data, the county data was included as like as a contextual piece, right? Like Glendale crashes are decreasing, so are LA County crashes, right? So like you're not bucking a trend, you're on trend with the county. That's helpful context to understand your crash data. It would be, alarming if your crash data was going up and everyone else's crash data was going down, for example. But what's important is not that you have more crashes or less crashes per capita than your adjacent cities and municipalities. What's important is where are your crashes happening and what can you do about it, right? These are your high crash corridors. These are the most unsafe places based on the crash data for people biking. That's alarming. That's a problem. These are real people that live and work and play in your city that are getting killed and maimed on your city streets. So where is that happening? And then the second question is, what can we do about it? So the importance of the data is not, the importance of the data is to geographically pinpoint where, so you can then ask why and what you can do about it.
And that I appreciate that, Sam, because I'm just trying to wrap my head. One of the things that I think is important when there's a lot of data and a lot of statistics, and in this case, when there's data and statistics that's missing or just not available to us, is making sure that the manner in which the information is presented is done in a way that is understandable to people who aren't taking a deep dive look into some of these numbers. So that helps me a lot. I appreciate it. I have a few other questions. You mentioned Burbank and Pasadena as cities that allow cyclists to ride on sidewalks. What did their data say about bicycle and pedestrian accident and safety information relative to just bicycles on the sidewalks? Did you look at data about accidents between cyclists and pedestrians in those cities?
I just want to be clear that Glendale has the ability to allow sidewalk riding, and what we're recommending is that you do that where it can be done safely, right? So that's what these other cities have done. I don't have specific data about cyclists, pedestrian and bike crashes on city sidewalks in Burbank and Pasadena. What I do know is that the largest threat to both people walking and biking are people driving, and that the reason people prefer to bike on a sidewalk and certainly walk on a sidewalk is because that is where they feel safest. Oftentimes, cities will say in their municipal code or their vehicle code, right, you can bike on a sidewalk when it does not present a hazard to pedestrians and there is no safe alternative, no other safe alternative, meaning a bicycle facility that is appropriate for the roadway. So I think that the city could modify the code to say something like that, where it does not interfere with pedestrians, where it does not pose a threat to pedestrians, and also where there is not a safe alternative within the roadway. Because again, what people are doing is they're biking on sidewalks because they don't feel safe. And until that alternative is, and people are already biking in Glendale, right? You have people who bike in Glendale. And so what this is provides is, you know, decriminalizing what they're doing basically because they would feel unsafe or be killed otherwise. I'm sorry, that was a long-winded answer to say I don't have that data. But I do want to explain why the policy is important.
Just to make a comment, to my understanding, we're trying to create these plans and change of infrastructure and everything to make things easier for both people who prefer walking, people who prefer to bike, and people who are driving, for them to everything to be more clear so they understand the rules, how to, let's say, yield when they see a bicyclist, or how to, I don't know, give them away or something. And adding something into the policy that is gonna have a lot of loopholes, like for example saying you can bike on the sidewalk if there is, how you framed it, I don't know, if it's safe or if it's not, I don't remember the exact phrase that you use, but if you're leaving it to the bicyclist to determine whether this is a right time or right opportunity to bike on the sidewalk, I wouldn't agree with that, because this is in order to make everything more clear cut rather than make it more confusing and chaotic. If there's anything that I misunderstood, please pardon and clarify.
And if I may,
No, I mean,
Commissioner, if I may, I think what you're saying is, and what I'm hearing is that part of determining this plan is not leaving things to subjective interpretation by anybody, whether it's.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, whether it's the pedestrian or the cyclist or the driver or whatever. So I completely understand that. Sorry, Sam, I interrupted you.
Oh no, I appreciate the point. As there is plenty in the vehicle code that allows drivers their own discretion, right? And what the law and what the vehicle code is for is really the enforcement, right? So you're not supposed to turn right on red if there's a pedestrian in a crosswalk, right? You're supposed to yield. You're basically supposed to stop and then yield to oncoming traffic. Lots of people don't stop. They just make a right on red regardless if there's oncoming traffic or if there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk. That is what's unsafe about it, right? But that is up to the driver's discretion. What the vehicle code is then used for is enforcement. So the police officer can then use the vehicle code to enforce, a ticket against the driver who is making an unsafe right on red because they didn't actually come to a full stop. So similarly, if the vehicle code or municipal code says you're allowed to ride on sidewalks in the central business district unless it is hazardous or to pedestrians and there's no safe alternative in the roadway, no cyclist is going to know that that's what the municipal code says. What it is for the police officer to then, enforce the rule. The problem with disallowing sidewalk riding while people are doing it to save their own lives is that there is the opportunity for uneven enforcement against what is often low-income people of color who are just trying to get to their jobs or get home from their jobs. So by allowing safe sidewalk riding, you are reducing the risk of low-income people being enforced against for doing something that they have to do in order to get to work and get home safely.
Got it. In the phases that you've proposed and some of the proposed facilities, is there an analysis as to how likely the proposed facility would end up requiring lane reconfiguration or loss of parking?
So we have the map on 22 that shows where we believe there will likely be a need for either the reallocation of a parking lane or a moving lane. And on some of those facilities, it's not in this presentation. We have a clearer idea of what that would be, whether it's, curbside parking that's not heavily used, or, a turn lane that could go, be reconfigured. In some cases, it's like more of a 4-3 conversion that we were talking about earlier. Again, this is a citywide plan, and this is done at a higher level as these projects come up for implementation and funding and design. Those specific decisions will get made, both from a technical aspect and then also, I imagine, from community engagement and also political engagement process.
What do you have the mileage? I see the map, thank you. Do you have the mileage of, the number of miles in
each
your,
of these categories?
Yeah, in each of these categories. Can you provide that for me real quick? The arterial requires lane configuration. Let's start with that.
I do not have those numbers off the top of my head, but that would be something very easy to calculate. So we can do that and get back to you on that. I'm sorry that I don't have that right now.
No, that's okay. In the cases where you've identified, and I would love those numbers just to know them, and I think the council will probably appreciate having access to that as well. In the cases where you've identified an arterial requires lane configuration, were there conversations with first responders in terms of the impacts that may have on their response times? Or any input that they might have on that in terms of their ability to conduct their jobs in terms of how it impacts the community?
Yeah, we have not spoken with PD or your fire department about this specifically. It's hard to say because we don't know the ways in which it could affect response times. We have talked to Public Works about, the process through which implementing these projects would take, including, detailed analysis of traffic volumes, turn-in volumes, all these things that would also probably include a public outreach process. Which not just public, but also, internal city outreach process. So like that would include, working with your various, fire and police departments.
Okay, and
I guess to answer your question is I couldn't tell you what the delay impacts might be on any of these roadways, because that's a very complicated question that also depends on everything else that's happening in the network, not just on that, road segment.
So Sam, just so that I understand that last part, when you say you can tell us, is that something?
I cannot.
Oh, you cannot. Got it. Sorry, you cut out. I was like, wow, you can tell us.
No, sorry. Yeah, no, I cannot. I would not be able to tell you, the impacts on delay without having done a detailed traffic study, which is also doing, traffic counts and et cetera, et cetera. And this, again, the scope of a citywide bike plan is a planning document that is, covers the entire city on with an ambitious and safe bike plan, a bike network for the whole city. I think that these are all, we have heard a lot of these questions or similar types of questions throughout this process, and because these are really important issues, but unfortunately, a lot of these things are outside the scope of what is ultimately a planning document for the entire city. And like a lot of these details will be worked out in future planning, design processes, right? So this is kind of like the preamble to all of that. Like this is the intention. This is we want this here. And then when you go to build it, that's when you do those types of analyses.
Yeah, and I'm asking these questions because I know that with the prior bike plan and its level of implementation, there's always going to be a expectation in the public, for example, that if it's in the bike plan, it's going to get done 100%. And so having context for me and for the public in terms of the idea that this is a plan and some of this very important analysis has just not even been considered yet in this suggestion is very helpful. You mentioned that the financial cost analysis has not been completed. When is the expected completion of that? I mean, if we're the last people that you came to before council, I assume that that's soon?
Yeah, it's under review by city staff right now.
Is there?
Our intent is to present it to city council in April.
Got it. Is there any preview that can be given to us, a rough estimate of what each of these phases might look like? I know that you're reviewing to be able to give a very good estimate and making sure that those estimates are accurate. But do we have a rough idea, within millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars of what these 4 phases are going to cost over the course of 20 years? And this is for staff.
Madam Chairman, my name is Perez Zorba, and yes, those costs are being done, and later on, we can send you a copy if you would like to look at them.
Sure.
Of course, it's not detailed, it's in general, but based on the phases and also total cost of implementation of the plan.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any rough estimate that you could provide?
At this point, I don't have it. I apologize for I didn't know, because it's in process. I'm working with Public Works to make sure that it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm a poker player, so I'm asking you to flip over one of your cards.
Yeah, I will send it to you.
Understood. I appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
I appreciate that. Let's see here. I think right now that's all I have in terms of questions. I don't know if you want to follow up with comments as well, or are we going to do that in a separate? Oh,
If you don't mind. I don't know if this is directed to the staff or Sam, to you. Outreach. I think we do want the public to be our partner in this project. So I've seen a couple of the postcards that has been sent out to public, inviting them to come to these meetings, but those postcards did not indicate what is it being proposed. They were just saying beautifications. It wasn't clear. So I didn't see anywhere in those cards saying that, are you okay with removing a lane from your street and making that a bike path? That would intrigue people to see, wait a second, what's going on? I'd like to be part of that. Why aren't we worded correctly? Or what is it that we were trying to do? Why are we trying to be vague? I don't know if this is directly to you or to staff, but I like to understand, because I've seen several. I was going to bring one of them, the latest one that is passed down about 2 weeks ago. And I didn't see a clear vision of explaining to the public that what is it that's being implemented. Beautification doesn't cover removing a lane off the street. So can you explain that for me? Why is it that we don't have clear vision of what's being told to public? Thank you.
So I'll allow our city engineer to provide some more details on project specific. But what you're referring to, those are already projects that are in the works. So they're not specific to the bike and pedestrian master plan, but those are specific projects that were already undertaken. And actually, some of those are in response to the previous bike and pedestrian master plan. But I'll let our city engineer discuss more about our specific approach to public outreach for those specific projects.
Thanks, Mr. Hernandez. Chairperson Bonstein, members of the commission. In regards to your question, is it regarding this bicycle transportation plan, or are we talking about the projects that would be proposed
Yes, the
as part of
bicycles,
it in the
because,
future?
I mean, it wasn't clear. It was about one of the meetings, I guess, that they were inviting people for a project. It was a bike lane project. And there were no mention of what kind of a change is going to be implemented. I think we do need public to be in our side and to be able to explain what is it we're trying to go for. Safety and removal of the lanes is going to, these are things that will have an immediate impact on everyone's bottom line. So if you're not clear on the message, I don't know how we're going to, if let's say after we implement the whole thing and the public comes out and says, what's going on? We don't want to have that kind of a reaction. So my question for you would be, is it a reasoning behind that we're not clear completely on what is it that we're trying to propose here?
I don't believe there's a reasoning per se. We're not trying to leave out any information. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. And it's also a learning process. There's been very few multimodal projects that have gone on in the city over the past couple of years. We've been a lot more active as a result of additional funding, additional master plans, this master plan update being one of them. One of the suggestions as part of this master plan is to come up with a proactive, streamlined guidance towards projects such as this. Because if you don't come up with some type of a streamlined guidance, it's going to take long for a project to move forward, especially the larger projects, the arterial projects like Glendale Avenue, Brand Boulevard, Pacific Avenue, some of the major projects that Sam had mentioned. And so I think the intention is for the city council to give us direction on a streamlined method so that way our projects can move forward at a faster pace. However, as part of that streamlined method, you still have to consider the outreach that's given to the public, the community, and also the opportunities for them to opine on those projects and their inputs, just like you're saying now.
My only concern is that if the public doesn't quite understand exactly what that plan is entitled, their reaction, I mean, I've looked at some of the data that we had before. There were like a study done based on interviewing 12 people. I mean, how can we determine that, that's going to be the reasoning? So it shows that the outreach wasn't done correctly. People, public wasn't notified correctly. That's my only concern. So if you're saying that once this plans are being implemented and we're trying to move forward, it's going to be a clear way of notifying public. Is that correct?
That was Public Works' recommendation.
Okay.
In response to this plan is to come up with a larger plan on how everybody expects the outreach and the notifications to occur so that we are on the same level playing field and that we're transparent from day one and that we achieve as much effective communication as possible and that we reach out to as many people impacted.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Just a follow-up question. Is it possible for us to see the materials that are going to go to public too, or this is basically being too micromanaging or putting my nose where it doesn't belong?
Are you talking about like for future projects, or are you talking about this plan in general?
Future, just like whatever, a future project that definitely has to do with transportation. This one too as well, whatever is going to, future, meaning future materials. Of course, whatever has been done already, but the ones that are going to go out to public, maybe we can see that as well, just to make a comment on it as a citizen and as a commissioner as well, as a commission team as well.
That's a good comment. As part of Public Works' process, I don't want to deter from this plan or CDD's intention of this evening, but as part of our process, we often come to TPC before we go to council, and there's again, if the streamlined notification process is going into effect or some type of a overall policy goes into effect, then yeah, we'd be more than happy to come to you if you need multiple times, as long as it doesn't extend the life of a project out.
And you're saying as part of it, perhaps in the staff report or as part of the presentation, showing the commission what the visuals look like? if they were,
That works.
right?
So as mentioned by our city engineer, when we come before the TPC, we will identify what are some are high-level outreach perspective until we actually approve the project and then hire a company to do the specific outreach. I mean, we can discuss kind of what our approach to outreach would be, because obviously we're going to scope that out when we solicit the service to the consultant who's going to prepare the design and do part of the outreach. So we can discuss at a high level when we bring that to the TPC.
Great, thank you very much.
I have one more question for Sam. And this is just curiosity. With the current rapid development of AI, has there been any consideration of what the impacts of the potential implementation of full self-driving might be to these types of plans?
That's a fun question. I'm happy to muse on that. So you're referring to self-driving vehicles?
Yes.
So, I mean, it really depends, first of all, on, let's say vehicles can drive themselves. It depends on the regulatory regime, right? There's kind of two, broadly speaking, scenarios. One in which, like, we all share cars and they drive around and pick us up and take us where we want to go. And they're super efficient because now you need half as many cars for the same number of people. The other scenario is that you can drive everywhere all the time because you're not actually putting in any effort. And so now there's more cars and there's more driving. And then there's a spectrum in between, right? And part of that depends on the regulatory regime, but also on the technology and what it's capable of. So I think my answer is partially, this bike plan is a statement on the future of what the city of Glendale wants. And the city of Glendale, by commissioning and going through this entire process, is saying we want a safe and connected bike network for all of Glendale, regardless of, self-driving vehicles. We want people to have transportation options. We want no carbon transportation options for people. We want safer streets. We want it to be safer to bike and to walk and to drive, regardless of whatever technologies there are around. AI and self-driving vehicles does not solve the problem of cars being, using 100% of the roadway. And so I think regardless of that technology, this plan is saying we want a different future for Glendale.
I appreciate it. I know that was kind of out there, but I imagine in 20 years, in less than 20 years, we might be having these discussions less musingly and more specifically.
No, I love it. Thank you for asking.
If now is a good time, I still have some questions and comments. So in no particular order other than this is what I wrote down. Again, just going back to the bicycle crash analysis, appreciate that information. I thought it was really kind of fascinating. I wrote down just some stuff for myself, including, the broadsides were the number one type of accident that it happened. Of course, looking at intersections, which are really key as locations. Little concerning to see the high number of youth involved in pretty significant accidents, with the highest crash rates being at age 15 to 19 on the bicycles. So as part of this kind of emphasis of the plan and kind of what our future looks like, hoping a future in which, teenagers can more freely access bicycles, which is, pre-vehicle permits, or for some of us teenagers who are old and also still don't have that. It's just a great way of getting around. But when you look at the data, it seems very concerning. A lot of us have anecdotal stories for that too. Okay, so that is, thank you for that. I had a question. So table 12 on page 11 of the staff report, I think this is really a description of what ends up being the visual in that map. I was curious at the time I was reading this why they're called draft safety corridors. Because I was thinking, well, it's the opposite. These are actually corridors that have had the numbers show that they are the least safe. But then I also noted that in AB 43, they use the term safety corridor. So I guess it's maybe a question, is it because of that? And that's why you use the term. And if not, then maybe we'd want to just phrase it in a way that was less opposite.
No, that is exactly why. That's very astute. It is
Okay.
because of that state law that we start to designate them as safety. I mean, I think we could say, you know, they're safety focused corridors.
Yeah.
They're not safe corridors.
Right, not currently. Okay, and let's see. Actually, a question about the circulation element. Here's a random one. How old is it? It's a quiz moment. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Madam Chairman, we did the circulation element in 1998, and the new one is being done now. And we are, in process of just started, and pretty soon we'll come to you and present our finding and policy that we're recommending.
Oh, great, pretty soon.
Yeah, very soon.
Wow, okay, that's amazing. Well, that'll be good to see. Long time coming, but the plan that sets the biggest scale of concept, right, for circulation. Okay, next up, geographic equity. So your map showed a distinction, 4 different geographies within the city. It looks like it's kind of laid out by just scale of square miles or square acreage. It's not based on the network or population. Is that right?
The way it was determined was South Glendale was everything south of the freeway.
Mm-hmm.
West Glendale is coterminous with the West Glendale plan. North Glendale is where Verdugo and La Crescenta split. So it's kind of like where you start to enter into that more populous and mixed use area. And then Central Glendale is just everything else.
So is it based on community plan areas or a separate type of geography division entirely?
It's based on I would say, you know, West Glendale is based on the West Glendale plan, right? But it is not related to the other community plans.
Okay.
It's really just a way of saying, broadly speaking, making sure that each part of the city in each phase has some bike projects.
Yeah.
Right? So that
You want to
one,
distribute it
building
throughout
the
the city,
network.
but it's also true that South Glendale has so much more of the population and the routes too. So you don't want to overemphasize like completely fair across all 4 when we have our population numbers and our street network is so much less in northern and I think
Right.
central.
And obviously Central Glendale, most of it are the mountains, and so there's just going to be fewer projects there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And 2 final questions here. So, in your list of recommendations, again, where are they? I support them, and actually, in reference to that AB 43 speed limit one, it made me think of a previous time that we had to actually change the speed limits to reflect current speeds, and I think we were all kind of baffled because people were driving above the speed limit, and we were behooved to then increase the speed to show how people were driving fast, which was counterintuitive to either, like, people were being rewarded sort of for not following the speed limit, but it was coming down through state law. So I do think this is an interesting correction to that because it seems problematic to increase the speed limit just based on that notion and not looking at safety in particular. So, and then I just wanted to ask too, so knowing that this went to,
Just one comment on
oh
that.
yes, please.
Is that the reason is what's called the 85th percentile rule, and basically there's like state and law that says, you know, if you set the speed limit to what the 85th percentile of the speed is, and so, and roadway design determines driving speed way more than the speed limit sign.
Exactly.
I think it was Eli that was saying he drives what everyone else around him is driving. And so it is often unfair to design a roadway for 60 miles per hour and then sign it for 35.
Exactly.
So roadway design is really important in safety and speed. And when the 85th percentile rule is applied, you get much higher speeds. So this is a course correction.
Thank you. And my final question was just, knowing that this went to Sustainability Commission and the Planning Commission, they had, I think, a joint meeting. Is there, I don't know if I hate that I'm asking this. Is there anything that we missed? Anything that was summarized or raised in that meeting that is worth noting here? And if not, and maybe the materials are reflective of their comments.
I would say we spent a lot of time talking about sidewalk riding. That was that. So I did take pains to explain that more clearly for this commission meeting. I hope that I was successful. Because people raised a lot of the same issues that were raised in this meeting. You know, about time and place and manner. And so I hope that I was clear about what is actually being recommended here, not that people should just be speeding on whatever sidewalk they want, whenever they want.
I looked up the terminology, just aside, I looked up the terminology for City of LA. It's called, you can ride on the sidewalk, basically, unless you're acting with willful and wanton disregard for the safety of persons or property. We were looking for that like terminology, right? It's kind of a funny way of putting it. Wanton disregard. You know it when you see it? I don't know. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I'm just looking back through notes to see what else came up a lot. I think a lot of the same issues that you all brought up, you know, about lane reconfiguration, sidewalk riding, licensing people to ride bicycles. Apparently that was done many years ago in the city. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just skimming over notes right now. But yes, from my memory, the sidewalk riding took up a lot of the evening.
Are there any other final comments? Yes.
You know, thank you. This is a very, very ambitious plan, and I trust that the staff will provide City Council with the context of our comments and some of the questions that we have. I would ask that any estimate of cost for this also incorporate any costs associated with outreach or more studies that would have to be done in order to determine whether or not the suggested changes are feasible. So not just what is the cost of implementing and maintaining, but filling the gaps in terms of the data and information necessary in order to determine feasibility in the first place. So I would hope that those costs are also included in any cost estimate and called out, because they are important. Continuing data collection is something that we also mentioned. That's going to be very important. And the quality of your data, and I know the City of Glendale knows this. I spent 13 years on the audit committee. The quality of your data collection is going to determine how well you can move the things that you'd like to move here in the city of Glendale. And so one of the things that is unfortunately feels like is a little bit short in this is just the availability of some of the data that would have been very helpful in informing some of these conclusions. And it's helpful to have experts like Sam who, you know, have the ability to give their professional opinion based upon their experience. But it's a lot more satisfying as a decision maker to have access to data that supports the experts' opinions on those things. And so, like I said, this is an extremely ambitious plan, and I hope that the city council looks at and considers all of this in terms of implementing this plan and accepting this plan, and also considers what those kind of secondary and tertiary impacts would be going down the line. So thank you so much, Sam and staff, for this report.
I was wondering, I sent some images. Did you guys get those pictures? Can I see what I called slide 1 first? So I have this, it's the pictorial history of Glendale by Arroyo. And I was just looking through it, thinking about this topic. This picture shows 1927 Brand Boulevard. And I just noticed there's two people biking in the street. One of them's clearly a minor. And I thought back, you know, my grandpa and his brother grew up here. And that could be them. They're the right age. Just taking note, this is a fully multimodal space. We've got public transit in the middle, people waiting for the car in what is now a traffic lane. That's fine. And so that was my grandfather's generation. This is the 70s. These people are about my parents' age. My parents had just moved away during this time, but these folks are safely on the sidewalk. I guess now that I'm a parent and thinking about the future, I just think about what's the cost of not taking the actions necessary to make a multimodal city possible. It's just a reminder that the things that we do here really, they shape the future. Just thanks a lot.
With that, may I ask, what is the next item on the agenda?
Item 8, oral communication. Discussion is limited to item not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. We don't have any callers for this item.
Shocking. Okay. Do we, the next item on the agenda, where are people at? I'm a little jealous because they attended the Sustainability Commission, Planning Commission. All right, that's fine. No, we're good. Commission staff comments and updates. Is that our next agenda item?
Yes.
I have an item, actually. Knowing that we have one student member we are proud to have on our commission, I believe we ought to have 2, or I guess we have an option of 1 or 2. I'm curious of the status of our second, if we're getting a second. And the reason I asked this too, I noted that I was doing some research. I know the Sustainability Commission has two, and they also had an ad hoc committee to help attain another one. I'm presuming you didn't need our help with that, but I could be wrong. Let me ask, what is the status? They also had a suggestion to move out the date of submittals for resumes, which I remember this last year feeling a little concerned for early, like before the summer, people would have to submit, and students are very busy just before the summer, and they don't even know some of the details of what their fall brings. So how might we consider moving out the date, and how's it going with the second student commissioner? And if anyone else has questions related to that.
The previous director, he did have the option of appointing 2 people, but he chose to pick 1 student commissioner. So we were allowed to have 2, but he decided to move forward with 1.
Because he's so excellent, we hardly need another. Okay.
However, I mean, ultimately, it's the commission's decision. If you feel that a second commissioner, student commissioner, obviously we can explore that idea and move down the path. The decision was previously made, but I'm open to, if the commission, if it is the commission's desire, we can start the process to potentially look for a second student commissioner. As long as since it is allowed, we're open to the commission's
Is it a 1-year appointment?
That I'm not aware, but obviously when we bring back a report, maybe at
Okay.
the next meeting, I can provide a little further update.
If it's only 1 year, we're almost at time, but I think 2 would be great, and if we needed help locating a college student that is a resident of Glendale, I think we would all be supportive to have the next generation extremely interested in transportation and parking. Honored to do that. Thank you. You have a comment?
Yeah, I actually wanted to in person say welcome to Mr. Hernandez. Last time I was overseas, so I'm really happy to work with you. And yeah, thank you very much again, Fred, Arizu. You're phenomenal. Thank you, Sam, for a great job. And then I actually had a question, but Mr. Casanova just left, and I guess that's something that had to do with him, with one of the presentations that he had previously. There is a pilot project about speed limits that I was interested in joining that team, and I believe Mr. Emrani was in charge of communication with Mr. Casanova to understand if there is a special appointment that has to be done through the commission, or is there anything that I can just join, basically. So if I can get an update on that, because last time I spoke about it, I haven't heard any precise decision or comment on that, so I truly appreciate it. And yeah, that's it for now. Thank you very much to my colleagues. Great questions. Commissioner Marian, you rock. You have the funnest questions. So, like too futuristic. Nice. So thank you very much. And once again, it was an honor, and it was a pleasure serving on the committee for bicycle transportation planning. So thank you very much. And that's it for today.
Thank you both for your representation on that. Okay, unless there's further comments, may I have a motion, or may I ask what is next on the agenda?
Item 10, adjournment.
So moved.
Second.